In a suburban home, law enforcement officials investigate a brutal double homicide. FBI special consultant Will Graham arrives and, through a process of empathic reconstruction, visualizes the murders of Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe. He concludes that the killer is a copycat emulating a serial killer who has been inactive. The next day, after giving a lecture at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, Graham is approached by Jack Crawford, the head of the Behavioral Science Unit. Crawford wants Graham's help on a case involving 8 missing college girls in Minnesota, all with similar physical features. Graham is hesitant to return to the field. Crawford consults with psychiatrist Dr. Alana Bloom, who expresses concern for Graham's mental stability, but Crawford is determined to use his unique skills. Meanwhile, the body of the 8th missing girl, Elise Nichols, is discovered in a field, gruesomely mounted on a stag's head. At the FBI lab, the forensics team, including Beverly Katz, finds that the victim's lungs were removed and replaced with antler velvet. They also discover a metal fragment in her clothes. Seeking a psychological evaluation of Graham, Crawford visits Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a respected psychiatrist. Later, Graham and Lecter meet for the first time in Crawford's office. Lecter quickly discerns Graham's unease with social interaction and his profound empathy, which allows him to understand killers. Based on the evidence, Graham deduces that the killer is a cannibal, eating the lungs of his victims, and that Elise Nichols was a failed victim due to having liver cancer. He also theorizes that the killer has a daughter around the same age as the victims. The metal fragment is identified as coming from a pipe threader used at several construction sites, leading the team to a suspect named Garrett Jacob Hobbs. As Will and Hannibal drive to Hobbs's home, Hannibal makes an anonymous phone call, cryptically warning Hobbs they know. Upon their arrival, Hobbs's wife stumbles out of the house, her throat slashed. Inside, Will confronts Hobbs, who is holding his daughter, Abigail, at knife point. When Hobbs cuts Abigail's throat, Will shoots and kills him. In the aftermath, Will and Hannibal sit by Abigail's bedside in the hospital, where she lies in a coma. Hannibal observes that Will feels a sense of paternal responsibility for the girl now that he has taken her father's life. Following the shooting of Garrett Jacob Hobbs, Will Graham practices at a firing range, visualizing Hobbs as his target. Later, Jack Crawford picks up a troubled Will who has been sleeping in his car and takes him to a new crime scene in the Chippewa National Forest, Hobbs's hunting cabin. Inside, they find a room filled with deer antlers. Jack reveals there are still 7 missing girls connected to Hobbs. Will asserts that Hobbs acted alone and was consuming his victims. Meanwhile, a tabloid blogger, Freddie Lowndes, arrives at the crime scene and obtains information from a local detective. Later, she publishes an article online titled, "It Takes One to Know One," detailing Will's involvement in the case and implying he is unstable. Hannibal Lecter reads the article. Jack, Will, and the Bow team are called to another crime scene in a Maryland forest where several bodies have been discovered buried in a shallow terraced garden and covered in fungi. The victims, all diabetic, were being kept alive in a comatose state and fertilized with a sugar solution to cultivate the mushrooms. Will profiles the killer as someone who sees a profound connection between the victims and the fungus, viewing them as part of a single organism. The investigation leads the team to a pharmacy chain where 9 diabetics have recently gone missing after filling insulin prescriptions. The pharmacist at one location, Eldon Stamets, is not present when the FBI arrives. After discovering a victim's body in the trunk of his car in the pharmacy parking lot, Will realizes that Stamets, having read Freddie Lowndes' article about Will's connection to Abigail Hobbs, is likely heading to the hospital to abduct her. Will rushes to the hospital and finds Abigail's room empty. He pursues Stamets, who is wheeling Abigail away on a gurney. In a deserted hallway, Will confronts and shoots Stamets, who survives. Afterward, Will sits with Abigail in her room as Dr. Alana Bloom reads to her. In a therapy session, Will confesses to Hannibal that he enjoyed killing Hobbs. Hannibal suggests this feeling is natural, comparing it to the power God must feel. Later, Hannibal has dinner with Jack, who expresses concern over Will's mental state. Separately, Freddie Lowndes, posing as a patient, attempts to secretly record her therapy session with Hannibal. He discovers the recorder, confronts her, and takes it, ominously telling her she has been very naughty. The episode opens with a flashback of Abigail Hobbs on a hunting trip with her father, Garrett Jacob Hobbs, as she takes aim at a deer. The scene transforms into a nightmare where she sees herself as the deer and relives her father attacking her and being shot by Will Graham. She awakens in a panic in her hospital room. At Will Graham's home, tabloid journalist Freddie Lowndes arrives unannounced, informing Will that Abigail has woken from her coma. After Will dismisses her, he receives a call from Jack Crawford. In Jack's office, Will and Alana Bloom learn that Jack wants Will to speak with Abigail, hoping she might have been an accomplice. Alana strongly objects, fearing it will re-traumatize the girl. Hannibal Lecter suggests that confronting the trauma might be therapeutic for Abigail, and Jack decides they will take her back to her home in Minnesota to jog her memory. Later, Will lectures his class at the FBI Academy, profiling the copycat killer who murdered a victim on a stag's head. He theorizes the killer is an intelligent psychopath who warned Hobbs of the FBI's arrival and is now continuing his work. Jack calls Will and Hannibal to a new crime scene, a remote cabin where another victim, Nicholas Boyle, the brother of one of Hobbs's victims, has been found impaled on a wall of antlers. Will realizes the copycat killer struck the man who had been harassing Abigail. Freddie Lowndes gains access to Abigail's room by posing as a psychiatrist, but is quickly discovered and removed by Will and Hannibal. Later, Hannibal encourages a fragile Abigail to leave her room for a walk in the hospital's greenhouse with him and Will. There, Abigail expresses her fear of nightmares and her guilt, believing that if her father had killed her, the other girls would still be alive. Jack proceeds with his plan, flying Abigail, Will, Alana, and Hannibal to her family home in Minnesota. The house has been vandalized with cannibal spray, painted on the door. Inside, Abigail is overwhelmed by memories, especially in the kitchen where her mother was killed. Her distress escalates when the mother of one of her father's victims arrives and accosts her. Hannibal intervenes, comforting the grieving mother. Abigail later finds a pouch made of animal hide containing human hair, causing her to break down. A flashback reveals the truth. Nicholas Boyle had broken into the Hobbs house and attacked Abigail, who killed him in a struggle. Hannibal arrived moments later, and instead of calling the police, he helped her hide the body, telling her it was self-defense but that no one would believe her. Back in the present at his office, Hannibal solidifies their shared secret. Abigail asks what he said to her father on the phone before the raid. Hannibal admits he warned him, creating a pact between them. He tells her, "I'll keep your secret, and I'll keep mine." In a therapy session, Will Graham tells Hannibal Lecter that he feels he is becoming more like the killer Garrett Jacob Hobbs, experiencing a strange sense of connection and even imagining himself committing the murders he investigates. Later, Jack Crawford brings Will to a gruesome crime scene in Stamford, Connecticut. The Turner family has been murdered and arranged around their dining room table. Will reconstructs the crime, deducing that the killer staged the scene to look like a home invasion gone wrong, but was actually trying to create a new family. He determines the killer is a woman who sees herself as a mother figure to a lost boy she has taken. Evidence reveals that the Turner's son, Jesse, is missing. The team, including Beverly Katz, Brian Zeller, and Jimmy Price, connects this murder to a similar family annihilation in Bangor, Maine, where a boy named CJJ Lincoln also went missing. Will realizes the killer is creating a new family with these abducted boys, moving approximately 500 miles between each crime to start anew. Meanwhile, Abigail Hobbs is in a psychiatric facility under the care of Dr. Alana Bloom. Hannibal visits Abigail, manipulating her by suggesting he can be her new guardian and help her leave the hospital. He later convinces Alana that releasing Abigail into his care would be beneficial for her recovery. The FBI team identifies the killer as Georgia Manchin, a woman who suffers from Cotard syndrome, a delusion that she is dead. They discover she has been abducting boys who have a family but are emotionally neglected, believing she is saving them. The most recent missing boy is identified as Chris O'Halloran. The team tracks Georgia to a new home where she is living with the abducted boys. As the FBI raids the house, Will finds Georgia and the boys in the backyard having a picnic. One of the boys, brainwashed by Georgia, points a gun at Will. Another boy, Chris, runs and Will pursues him. Georgia shoots at Will but is then shot and killed by Beverly Katz, who was positioned as a sniper. Will convinces Chris to put down his gun, and the boy is safely recovered. Back at his home, Will is troubled by the events. Alana Bloom visits Hannibal's office, where they share a drink and discuss Abigail. The episode ends with Hannibal bringing Abigail to his home, where they have breakfast for dinner with Alana. Abigail experiences a hallucination, seeing her deceased parents at the table with them, and smiles. The episode opens with Will Graham sleepwalking down a dark road, barefoot and in his underwear, until he is stopped by a police car. Disoriented, he is taken home. He visits Hannibal Lecter the next morning, troubled by the incident. Hannibal suggests Will is struggling with the stress of his work for the FBI. Meanwhile, Jack Crawford brings Will to a crime scene at a motel. Inside, a man and woman are found kneeling by the bed. the skin from their backs flayed and suspended to resemble angel wings. The FBI's forensic team, including Beverly Katz, Brian Zeller, and Jimmy Price, discovers the victims were drugged with a paralytic agent and were alive during the mutilation. Vomit found at the scene reveals the killer is on medication for a brain tumor and undergoing radiation. Will concludes the killer, dubbed the Angel Maker, creates these figures to act as guardian angels, fearing he will die in his sleep. Concurrently, Jack's wife, Bella, is secretly seeing Hannibal for therapy. She reveals she has terminal lung cancer and has not told Jack, not wanting to burden him further. Their marriage becomes strained, which is evident during a tense dinner at Hannibal's home. Later, Jack confronts Bella, and she confesses her illness and her decision to forgo chemotherapy. The Angel Maker's victims are identified as criminals, suggesting a vigilante motive. The FBI identifies the killer as Elliot Buddish, a truck driver with a brain tumor who had a near-death experience in a fire as a child and believes he has a guardian angel. When Jack and Will arrive at his family's abandoned farm, they find Buddish has killed himself, staging his own body as an angel in a barn. During the investigation, Will has a disturbing vision of Buddish who tells him, "I see what you are." Afterward, an exhausted and agitated Will argues with Jack, stating the work is becoming too much for him. Jack is unsympathetic, reminding him of his success in catching killers. Will then goes to Jack's office, and the two sit in silence, a moment of unspoken understanding passing between them. The episode concludes with Will waking up on the roof of his house, another sleepwalking episode having occurred without his knowledge. Following a gruesome murder at the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane, Jack Crawford and Will Graham are called to investigate. The victim, a nurse, was killed and elaborately displayed by an inmate, Dr. Abel Gideon, who then claimed to be the notorious Chesapeake Ripper. The murder is a precise copy of the Ripper's known methods, complete with the removal of specific organs. Inside the bloody infirmary, Will senses that the crime is merely plagiarism. He can see the Ripper's design, but does not feel his presence, leading him to conclude this is the work of an admirer. Dr. Frederick Chilton, the hospital's administrator, admits to Jack and Will that he discussed details of the Ripper case with Gideon during therapy sessions. Later, at a dinner party hosted by Hannibal Lecter, Alana Bloom confronts Chilton, suggesting he may have inadvertently manipulated Gideon into believing he was the killer through a form of psychic driving. Seeking to provoke the real Chesapeake Ripper, Jack gives an exclusive interview to tabloid journalist Freddie Lowndes, publicly identifying Gideon as the captured killer. The story is published on Freddie's website, which Hannibal reads with quiet intensity. The intended effect is immediate. Jack receives a phone call at home from a burner phone, playing a distorted recording of his former trainee, Miriam Lass, pleading for her life, the same trainee who vanished while investigating the Ripper 2 years prior. The FBI forensics team, including Beverly Katz, Brian Zeller, and Jimmy Price, is unable to trace the call. In a flashback, Miriam Lass is seen visiting Hannibal's office before her disappearance. She questions him about a patient of his who became a Ripper victim and discovers a drawing that connects Hannibal to the murders. Just as she realizes the truth, Hannibal attacks her from behind. A second call from the same untraceable number leads Jack, Will, and Beverly to an abandoned observatory. There, they discover the severed arm of Miriam Lass, preserved and positioned to be holding the ringing cell phone. The discovery confirms that the Ripper had kept Miriam alive for some time after her capture, using her voice to taunt Jack. Standing over the remains, a horrified Jack realizes the Ripper has been toying with him all along. Will Graham lectures a class at the FBI Academy on the Chesapeake Ripper, detailing the killer's surgical precision, his habit of killing in sounders of 3, and his practice of taking organs as trophies. As Will explains that the Ripper sees his victims as pigs, Jack Crawford arrives and pulls him from the lecture. Will goes to a hotel room where a man lies dead in a bloody bathtub, his abdomen crudely stitched. Reconstructing the crime, Will realizes the killer was an inept surgeon who botched an illegal organ harvesting, and the victim awoke mid-procedure. The killer, panicked, killed him and fled, and at the morgue, Brian Zeller and Jimmy Price confirm the victim's kidney was removed. They believe it's the work of the Chesapeake Ripper, but Will insists it's a clumsy copycat. Meanwhile, Hannibal Lecter attends an opera and later consults his own psychiatrist, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier, about feeling lonely despite being surrounded by people. Jack Crawford receives a call and discovers a severed arm holding a cell phone has been delivered to the FBI. The arm belongs to Miriam Lass, the trainee who disappeared while investigating the Ripper 2 years prior. Back at the academy, Will experiences a dissociative episode and misses an appointment with Hannibal, who finds him at his desk in a trance. The investigation reveals the latest victim was an EMT, leading the team to a private ambulance company. Beverly Katz finds security footage of one of the ambulances leaving the depot when it was logged for repairs. The EMT signed it out, Davon Silvestri, is an aspiring medical student. The team treks the ambulance to a secluded lot. Inside, they find Silvestri attempting to remove a man's kidney. Jack calls in Hannibal, who saves the victim's life while Silvestri is arrested. Jack, frustrated that this was not the Ripper, is left with a dead-end case. Later, Alana Bloom helps Hannibal prepare for a dinner party. They discuss Will, with Alana expressing concern that Jack is pushing him too hard. The episode closes with Hannibal hosting his elaborate dinner party, serving multiple courses to guests. As the guests applaud, Hannibal calmly informs them that nothing on the menu is vegetarian. Will Graham, experiencing another lost time episode, finds himself on the floor of his home, dismantling a boat motor without memory of starting the task. He later drives through a snow-covered landscape and arrives at the house of Alana Bloom. Inside, they discuss his deteriorating mental state. He kisses her, but she pulls away, stating that their respective instabilities make any intimacy unwise. Meanwhile, Dr. Hannibal Lecter is in a session with his patient, Franklin Freudeveau, who expresses deep anxiety about his only friend, Tobias Budge. Franklin worries Tobias is a psychopath and recounts a disturbing comment Tobias made about playing someone's throat like a cello. Shortly after, a new murder is discovered at a symphony hall. A trombonist is found dead on stage, his throat slit open and the neck of a cello inserted into his mouth. His vocal cords have been exposed and strung like an instrument. At the scene, Will Graham, Jack Crawford, and the forensics team determine the vocal cords were chemically treated in the same manner as traditional catgut strings. Will's investigation leads him to a string instrument shop owned by Tobias Budge. During their conversation, Will becomes suspicious of Tobias's expertise and experiences a disorienting auditory hallucination. Later, Hannibal visits the same shop, where he and Tobias have a tense, coded conversation, acknowledging each other's violent natures. Hannibal discovers that Tobias has been making strings from human intestines. A terrified Franklin rushes to Hannibal's office, revealing that Tobias confessed his desire to kill the trombonist. As Franklin speaks, Tobias arrives at the office. Seeing the threat, Hannibal swiftly kills Franklin. A brutal fight ensues between Hannibal and Tobias, which ends with Hannibal killing Tobias just as Jack and Will arrive. Hannibal stages the scene as self-defense, claiming Tobias killed Franklin and then attacked him. Later, Will visits a recovering Hannibal at home, confessing his attempted kiss with Alana and his ongoing instability. In a subsequent session with his own psychiatrist, Bedelia du Maurier, Hannibal discusses his interest in Will and the recent violent encounter in his office. The episode ends with Will at home, once again losing time. He comes to his senses to find he has knocked a hole through his brick fireplace, searching for an animal he thought was trapped inside, only to realize the sound was another hallucination. The episode opens on a bleak, snowy beach in Grafton, West Virginia, where Jack Crawford and Will Graham arrive at a crime scene. An FBI team is examining a grotesque totem pole constructed from 17 human bodies, some of which are decades old. The most recent victim, Joel Summers, is positioned at the very top. As Will investigates, he has a vivid, disorienting vision of himself as the killer, constructing the totem pole from unearthed corpses. The vision ends, and he abruptly finds himself in Dr. Hannibal Lecter's office in Baltimore, with no memory of how he traveled there. Will confides in Hannibal about his escalating episodes of lost time, sleepwalking, and hallucinations. Later, Alana Bloom visits Will at Quantico. She confesses her feelings for him, but states she cannot be with him while he is so unstable, which he accepts before they share a brief, intimate moment. Meanwhile, Abigail Hobbs attends a support group at the Port Haven Psychiatric Facility, where she is haunted by visions of her father's victims. She is later visited by tabloid journalist Freddie Lowndes, who convinces Abigail to co-author a true crime book about her life. When Hannibal and Will learn of this, they visit Abigail and warn her against it. The investigation into the totem pole killer leads Jack and Will to the home of Lawrence Wells, an elderly man who was a suspect in the first murder decades ago. Wells calmly confesses to being the serial killer and creating the totem pole to ensure his legacy. However, the FBI team quickly discovers inconsistencies. DNA analysis reveals that Joel Summers, the victim at the top of the pole, was the biological son of the first victim, Fletcher Marshall, not Lawrence Wells. Wells had an affair with Marshall's wife and murdered him out of jealousy, a crime of passion unrelated to the other killings. He killed Joel Summers recently to be caught, fearing he would die forgotten in his nursing home. While discussing the case with Hannibal, Will realizes he has been misremembering the night Nicholas Boyle died. It was Abigail who killed him, not Will. He confronts Hannibal, who admits to helping Abigail dispose of the body to protect her from Jack. Shortly after, Jack informs Hannibal and Alana that Boyle's body has been found. He brings Abigail to the morgue to identify the body, suspecting she knows more than she has revealed. Under pressure, Abigail confirms it is Boyle but maintains she hasn't seen him since he attacked her. Alone with Hannibal afterward, Abigail confesses she was complicit in her father's crimes, helping him lure his victims. Hannibal comforts her, telling her he knows and that he will protect her. Following a series of unsettling fugue states, Will Graham visits Georgia Madchen at a remote house. Inside, she is startled by a dripping sound and discovers someone has been living in her attic. When she investigates, she is attacked and killed by an unseen assailant. Later, during a session with Dr. Hannibal Lecter, Will expresses his growing instability and loss of time. Hannibal asks him to draw a clock, and Will produces a lopsided, distorted image, a clear sign of neurological distress that Hannibal silently notes. Will later experiences another fugue state, waking up disoriented in his car at his own home. He is then called to a gruesome new crime scene, the office of Dr. Sutcliffe, the neurologist who had recently examined him. Sutcliffe has been murdered, his face carved into a Glasgow smile. The forensic team, including Beverly Katz, finds skin fragments under the victim's fingernails that match skin found at a previous murder scene, linking the two crimes to a killer with a severe skin condition. Will deduces that the killer suffers from Cotard's syndrome, a delusion where the afflicted believes they are dead and cannot recognize faces, seeing them as imposters. Jack Crawford grows increasingly concerned about Will's mental health, but Beverly's analysis clears Will of any physical involvement in Sutcliffe's murder. While investigating Sutcliffe's office, Will has a vivid hallucination of Hannibal, clad in his plastic kill suit, murdering the doctor and handing the murder weapon to Georgia Madchen. This vision prompts Will to visit Alana Bloom, who is recovering in a hyperbaric chamber where his own reflection unnerves him. Later, Jack interviews Georgia Madchen's mother, who confirms her daughter suffered from Cotard syndrome and had a history of violence. The evidence now points to Georgia as the killer. Experiencing another bout of lost time, Will finds himself in the woods near his home. He rushes back to his house and discovers Georgia Madchen's body under his bed. Shortly after, Jack and the FBI arrive and find forensic evidence fishing lures made with materials from several recent victims implicating Will. Will is arrested. In a final, clarifying flashback, Will realizes that during a seizure, Hannibal had inserted a victim's larynx and other evidence down his throat via a feeding tube. Frederick Chilton dines at the home of Hannibal Lecter. They discuss Chilton's unethical attempts to convince patient Abel Gideon that he is the Chesapeake Ripper, a practice Lecter criticizes as clumsy. Meanwhile, Will Graham experiences a severe nightmare of drowning and wakes up sweating and disoriented. The next day, as Gideon is being transferred from the Baltimore State Hospital, he confronts Chilton, vowing to sue him for manipulating his identity. During the transfer, the van is ambushed. Will Graham incapacitates the guards and frees Gideon, telling him they will find the real Ripper together. Jack Crawford, Will, and the forensics team investigate the crime scene, where Will deduces that the Ripper orchestrated the escape to lure Gideon to him. Later, at Chilton's office, Will and Alana Bloom confront him about his methods. Will suffers another severe dissociative episode, collapsing after Chilton leaves. Gideon, posing as a psychiatrist, contacts tabloid journalist Freddie Lowndes and arranges a meeting at an old observatory. When Freddie arrives, she finds Chilton tied to a chair where Gideon, dressed as a surgeon, begins to vivisect him while keeping him conscious. Gideon forces Freddie to document the event for her website. When the article goes live, Jack's team sees the photos. Will realizes Gideon is recreating the Ripper's murder of Miriam Lass at the same location to draw him out. The FBI raids the observatory, finding Chilton alive but severely mutilated, with several organs removed. Freddie is safe, but Gideon has vanished. Will finds Gideon and drives him to Hannibal's house. Inside, Will suffers a complete breakdown, hallucinating that Gideon is the killer Garrett Jacob Hobbs. As Will points his gun, confused, Hannibal calmly disarms him just before Will collapses from a grand mal seizure. The episode ends with Will unconscious in a hospital bed with Alana at his side. In his office, Jack drinks with Hannibal, who informs him of Will's diagnosis of encephalitis. Hannibal recommends Will's firearm be confiscated, but Jack refuses, stating his faith in Will's abilities, unaware of the extent of Hannibal's manipulation. Will Graham visits Georgia Madchen, who is recovering in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. They have a brief, empathetic conversation before a spark from a comb she is using ignites the oxygen-rich environment, causing her to be immolated. At the FBI forensics lab, Jack Crawford and Will examine George's charred remains. The team discusses the fire's origin, noting that a grounding bracelet meant to prevent static buildup was removed. Will asserts that it was murder, not suicide or an accident, perpetrated by the copycat killer. Jack remains skeptical, pointing out that 2 suspects in the copycat case are already dead. In a tense meeting in Jack's office, Will explains his theory that the copycat killer knew both Garrett Jacob Hobbs and his victims, Sutcliffe and Georgia Madchen, as well as people has hinted. He believes the killer is someone involved in the investigations. Jack dismisses this, and a frustrated Will leaves. Jack then meets with Dr. Hannibal Lecter to discuss Will's deteriorating stability and his increasingly paranoid theories. Meanwhile, Freddie Lowndes and Abigail Hobbs discuss writing a book about Abigail's father. Abigail expresses her fear and trauma. Later, but Freddie pushes the idea. Will visits Abigail at the facility and tells her he is taking her back to Minnesota to confront her past, believing it will help them both find clarity. Bedelia Du Maurier arrives to find FBI agent Jack at Hannibal's office, Crawford waiting for her. He questions her about Hannibal's relationship with Will, revealing his concerns that Hannibal might be withholding information. She maintains professional confidentiality, but subtly expresses her own reservations about Hannibal's methods. After Jack leaves, Bedelia confronts Hannibal, warning him that he is crossing professional lines with Will and that she will no longer be his psychiatrist. Will and Abigail arrive at her family's abandoned cabin in Minnesota. As they explore the house, which is filled with mounted animal heads and antlers, Abigail becomes increasingly distressed. Will presses her about what she knows, suspecting she was aware of her father's crimes. He confronts her, and in a moment of panic, she confesses that she knew her father was a killer and that she helped him lure his victims. As Will reels from the confession, Hannibal appears and embraces a terrified Abigail. He whispers to her that he is sorry he couldn't protect her from Will, then gently caresses her face before she falls unconscious. Following a disturbing nightmare where he shoots a stag, Will Graham awakens in a sweat-soaked panic and vomits a human ear into his kitchen sink. Hannibal Lecter arrives at Will's home to find him sitting on the porch, disoriented and covered in mud. Will confesses he traveled to Minnesota to find Abigail Hobbs, but has no memory of what happened, only that she didn't return with him. Distraught, Will is embraced by Hannibal. Later, Jack Crawford and the FBI arrive at Will's house. As a forensics team processes the scene, Will is taken into custody. Inside, investigators discover a box of handmade fishing lures. At the FBI lab, Beverly Katz, Brian Zeller, and Jimmy Price analyze the lures and find they are made with human remains from all the copycat killer's victims. This discovery solidifies the belief that Will is the killer and has been taking trophies. The ear Will regurgitated is confirmed to belong to Abigail Hobbs. A distraught Alana Bloom confronts Jack, accusing him of breaking Will. Jack defends his actions by stating that Will saved lives, but admits he was acting on the advisement of Hannibal, the psychiatrist Alana recommended. Will escapes custody and confronts Hannibal at his office, holding him at gunpoint. Piecing together fragmented memories, Will accuses Hannibal of being the real killer. Before Will can act, Jack bursts in and shoots him in the arm. Will is taken to a secure medical ward, where he is diagnosed with advanced encephalitis, an inflammation of the brain that has been causing his hallucinations and memory loss. Alana shows Jack the distorted clock drawings Will had made as proof of his cognitive dysfunction, arguing that a neurological disorder is responsible for his state, not psychopathy. While Will is sedated and treated in the hospital, Bedelia Du Maurier for dinner. Hannibal visits. For dinner, she questions his involvement with another patient prone to violence and suggests his professional beliefs are unraveling. When Will is coherent, Alana visits him in an interrogation room. She tests him by asking him to draw a clock, which he again draws as a warped, disorganized circle. Jack later informs Will about the human remains found in his fishing lures. Will, in a moment of clarity, insists he is being set up by the real killer, someone with intimate knowledge of the cases and access to the evidence. The episode concludes with Hannibal visiting Will, who is now incarcerated behind bars at the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. Will looks at Hannibal with newfound certainty and says, "Hello." Hannibal returns a subtle, knowing smile.